This episode of Scheming is sponsored by DeSimone. DeSimone Consulting Engineering provides structural engineering, facade design consulting, integrated design and detailing, and construction consulting services for buildings of all types. Known for delivering thoughtful, innovative and sustainable solutions, DeSimone provides dedicated services from its UK, US, Canada, South America and Middle East offices. To find out more, visit www.d-simone.com. Hello and welcome to Scheming, the Place North podcast that gives property folk a platform to talk about three schemes they think about a lot. I'm your host, Dan Whelan, Deputy Editor of Place Northwest. My guest today is a man who has had more of a say on the transformation of Manchester's skyline than almost anyone else. His company has designed all 10 of the tallest buildings in the city, including the now iconic Beetham Tower. Joining me today to talk about the three schemes that he thinks about a lot is Ian Simpson, founding partner of Simpson Hoff Architects. Ian, welcome to the pod.
Thank you, a pleasure to be here.
So Ian, we're here to talk about your three schemes, but first I wanted to talk to you about what I just mentioned in the intro, Manchester's skyline. Yeah. It's changed dramatically over the last 10 years, but even in a shorter period than that really, and you've worked alongside Renaker to a great degree to build a lot of skyscrapers. How do you reflect on that, and when you look at the skyline, what do you think now?
It's quite interesting how quickly it has changed, actually. And we have some old photographs. They date back to 2017. And there's nothing on the skyline to the south there. Beetham Tower was obviously constructed pre-Great Recession. So 2007, I moved into Beetham Tower. And then the whole world fell off the edge of a cliff. So nothing happened, even though we did actually have lots and lots of planning permissions, including the Renaissance site, Great Jackson Street, etc., etc. All stopped. So it took quite a few years, actually, for Manchester to start introducing cranes on its skyline again. And I was fortunate enough to work with Darren Whittaker of Renaker, and we started to think about the Great Jackson Street master plan, but at the time he owned what was called Owen Street at the time, and he'd bought it from a previous client of ours, West Property, who had gone under in the recession and gone back to London. So there was a scheme, there was a sort of extant scheme, but I just knew there was an opportunity to rethink that scheme in terms of placemaking, but also in terms of the way that Darren wanted to approach the architecture and the buildings. And what you've got to remember is that there was no precedent for this scale of tower at all in the north, because the values were so low, build costs were high, there was hardly any margin to make it worthwhile, and that's why nobody was building anything. Until the Beetham Tower was built, Manchester didn't have much of a skyline, but because Beetham Tower was built basically in the context of the Roman Manchester with Deansgate and the Manchester Fort in Castlefield, it seemed to end up on all the axes of all the roads coming in from Hyde and Liverpool and so forth. So we knew that whole area would sort of act as a bit of a signpost, a bit of an opportunity to signal the city.
Like a gateway.
Yeah, as a gateway. And in terms of context, clearly we've got the city core, but then we've got this sort of rust belt that runs around the city where the old factories were and the old slum housing were. Once that's cleared, then there's an opportunity to create new development and high density residential. So to me, the concept of creating this really sustainable city core by introducing more and more residential was really important. But that rust belt is only between 300 and 600 metres wide, so it's not a big space. So we started to think obviously, that if the contractor was capable of building tall, then we could optimize the density, maximize the amount of public realm at the ground floor, create retail and F&B primarily at the ground, and they provide a backdrop to the historic Victorian core of Manchester. So it sort of started with that, really, as a vision that it was a site, optimize the density, 1,500 units on that site, over 3,000 people just in that one place.
Yeah.
And from there, Renaker were able to acquire other pieces of site
and continue to roll out that
and
model.
To continue to support that vision of creating really elegant, flexible residential that is cost effective as well. And don't forget, this zone was a zone, this Rust Belt was a zone that cut off the existing communities in Manchester, like in Ancoats or Hume, where social housing existed and always has. And Manchester has got a lot of social housing. What it never had was housing of any value in the city centre. So we were trying to complement that, not exclude social housing, but to complement what was already in the city centre. Because unfortunately, most of the social housing that was in the city centre was given to people who couldn't get out, who couldn't afford to get out. So that's why they were using, Hume was rebuilt 3 times before it became this sort of suburban part of the city that it is now.
I wanted to ask you just quickly before we get onto your schemes about criticism, because obviously, and you've said to me before, if you put your head above the parapet, you'll get shot at.
Yeah.
And if you look at Place Northwest comment section, whenever there's a Simpson Hoff scheme unveiled, it's kind of divided. There's some people who love the glass towers, some people who want something a bit different. Yeah. What would you say, in the face of that criticism?
I think it's. I don't, if people have a view, then you have to respect that. But I don't look at the comment sections of anything, to be honest, because as soon as I start, then the patchwork.
You value your mental health.
Well, I do, and I'm not on social media, thank God. But I'm of an age where that doesn't mean anything to me. But it is, you have to be able to put your head up and be criticised and praised equally. And I think there is a split. And inevitably, anything that's new, we can't all live in rose-covered cottages. There's the government proposal about streets and everybody should live in the equivalent of a Georgian terrace. Well, that gets about a density of about 250 homes per hectare. We're creating 1,000 homes per hectare. So you can't get the people in London. They don't need any more people. They don't want any more people. They turn people away. We actually need lots and lots of people working together, brushing up against each other in the city. And the best way to achieve that is high density development, but try and create beautiful buildings that have a silhouette to them and create a skyline for the cities, an imagery for the city that can be promoted. Whenever I look around at Christmas markets, every cup you pick up has got the Beetham Tower on it, or buildings do become icons for their city, and so that's the good side. And then there's other people say, "Oh, it's just another glass tower." It looks like I actually accidentally read something this morning about an oil refinery at the end of Deansgate.
Oh wow!
Which
how did that make you feel?
Well, it just think, well, okay, but fine, that's their interpretation, and they can go back to Middleton, to suburbia, and be happy. But actually, people love living in those buildings.
Yeah. I think in terms of the towers themselves, though, so some people aren't necessarily anti-tower, but they have a view on the sorts of towers that are being delivered in Manchester, because I think they look at London, for example, and they look at the Gherkin, Walkie-Talkie, Shard, and they see these kind of different silhouettes.
What's quite interesting there is, they're all offices.
Yes.
They're not residential, which is quite specific. And they're all glass, those buildings that you just referred to. And in fact, the City of London actually looks terrible at the moment. I just think there's so many different shapes of buildings that it looks like a zoo, to be honest.
Okay.
We've created a really beautiful building on the South Bank, One Blackfriars, which I'm going to talk about. But the rest of them are fairly ordinary. Okay. Nobody's really... I mean, what are the options? You could do brick, and we've got lots of brick. We've got lots of mid-scale brick and lots of grids. There's only so many ways that you can skin a tower, to be honest, and that's what it is, because you're trying to optimize the apartment. And the way I look at it is that I want as much natural light to come into that apartment. I want people to be able to sit in their apartment at the back of the space and look out, not to have to go to a window, because I've decided that you can only look out of a 3-foot square window. So it's all about the interior, flooding it with natural light, view and vista. I don't know any other material other than glass that keeps the rain out and lets the light and the view work for you. Now, I could get criticised for pattern making as well. But actually, there is a history of textiles and woven fabrics in this city that I think resonate quite well with the way we've approach the language and the materiality of the buildings that we've designed. Rather than it looking like Romania with 2,000 punched windows, because that's what you would end up with, we want to create something that reinforces the form of the building. So Deansgate Square has the inverted V offset forms. We've got a very elegant tower, Elizabeth Tower, and then we've got 360, which is circular, and the Blade, which is designed to bring natural light through to Crown Street. So we've tried to create something.
They're all different.
Every single one of them is different and distinctive, but they are part of a family, admittedly, and that is an approach to viability as much as...
Well, I was going to ask this. The values are... You said you don't view them as a constraint, but the values, if we look at the values up here compared to London, for example, it limits creativity to a degree, would you say? Or maybe it makes you more... You have to be more creative.
Well, you have to be as creative as possible, but we could not have built One Blackfriars in Manchester. The sales value on One Blackfriars were over £2,000 per square foot. Yeah, so a one-bedder is 2 million.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here we've got apartments at 250 grand. Now, that's still a lot of money to a lot of people, but it's still within an affordable, tangible, accessible zone.
So let's move on. Let's talk about the 3 schemes that we're here to talk about today. So as you know, I'm going to ask you about 3 projects that you think about a lot, the one you're most proud of, the one you wish you had done, and the dream scheme. So let's start at the one you're most proud of. We have already mentioned it a couple of times. What's that scheme, Ian? Talk us through it and why. Tell us why you're so proud of it.
It's difficult to pinpoint one particular scheme, and I've chosen for this podcast a building called One Blackfriars, but it could have easily been Urbis, it could have easily been Number 1 Deansgate or the Beetham Tower. But it was a building that took 15 years of my life to build. And as architects, we come up with sketches, and I came up with a sketch for that back in 2003 or something like that for One Blackfriars, and worked with the Beetham organisation originally, and before the Great Recession, and we developed a building that was half hotel, half residential in the Beetham model, like the Beetham Tower. And then the Great Recession hit. But before that, we had to try and get planning permission. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's a resistance to development in a global city like London, because they've got too many people. Every developer is a greedy developer, and you're the stooge working for the greedy developer. So there's no benefit whatsoever for the community.
In their view,
In their view. And you're dealing with 32 different communities. And the members of those planning committee go down and have a drink in the pub with the people who are complaining about any planning application. So it's incredibly difficult to build anything. And then there's a requirement for 50% affordable, which is not surprising when prices start at £2,000 a square foot. So it's actually resistance. So we had to go through what was called a public appeal, a planning appeal, to get permission, a public inquiry, effectively.
Yeah.
And that probably took 15 months or something like that. And we had to reduce the building by 10 metres high because it was visible from a 1950s bridge in St James's Park over the top of a whole series of buildings, bearing in mind that you've got the London Eye and the Wheel just there and the Shard. The fact that in the far distance, 3 miles away, you could see the top of the building.
It does seem faintly ridiculous.
Well, now they're building buildings that are significantly taller than Blackfriars next door to it.
So this was going to be 60 plus, and it ended up, it's 50 stories.
It's
right?
50 stories. So, I mean, I started with a building that was 220 metres tall. In the end, it ended up at, 150.
Yeah.
And
the shape is, speaking about the,
the form of the building,
shapes,
again, it was a very particular site. We know we can gather apartments around any footprint effectively. So to me, it's more about how you can create a really elegant form that contributes to the skyline at a distance, but also as you get closer to it, contributes to the public realm at ground floor level. So the building actually tapers in at the ground and sits on 14 columns. But that tapering allows you to create a new public square in the middle of a site that had never been publicly accessible before. It had a medium-scale building filling the whole site historically. So we created a new square right in the middle of the site, and then the building sloped away to the south and then returned on itself, and it orientated it. The whole building was orientated towards St Paul's. So it has a very, very slender profile on the front. In fact, it's twice as slender as the Swiss Re Gherkin building. Right. In fact, you could fit the whole of Blackfriars in Swiss Re building, which is quite stumpy when you look at it.
Right, okay.
So it's a very slender profile. So from St Paul's, it had a very elegant, slender profile, but it created this distinctive form that was one that about rising up, looking back towards the City of London and making a play for Southwark and this part of Southwark to connect with the city, because obviously Southwark was poorer than the northern side of the river. And that's really worked because, I mean, there's lots of development following down Blackfriars Road now, lots of big schemes, taller schemes, new development. But at the time, we were the first tall building to do that. And it was a scheme that, as I say, took a long time to get planning. And then the site was sold by the Beethams to the Berkeley Group, who have a very strong reputation for high quality residential, but it's usually, 10 stories, brick, balconies.
So this was something quite different.
Expensive buildings. And so this was quite different for Tony Pidgley, who sadly passed away, but headed up Berkeley Homes at the time. And I remember having meetings with him to negotiate a fee to carry on with the project, and then having to reduce significantly our fee to do the detailed design. Otherwise, another commercial architect would be appointed to do it.
Okay. And
they would have just effectively dumbed the whole building down. It would have been faceted. They wouldn't have put the passion and the energy into the resolution of the detail.
So you took a hit on the fee
we took a hit on the fee, and because we're passionate about seeing all our buildings delivered so that we can make the decisions with the client on the value engineering process, which is inevitable on projects, so we can make measured and valued decisions together. And we worked really hard to deliver that. And the glazing, it's a twin skin building, because in London you have to have external amenities, you have to have balconies for every single apartment. And there's examples of lots of towers with balconies on, and they just look horrible in London because at height you can't use them because it's too windy. They just put the old fridge on them or the trainers on or something. It just looks awful. And there's lots of examples in Canary Wharf of that. And we didn't want to do that. So we sheathed the building in an outer skin of glass that was reactive to temperature. So it almost had gills that breathed and changed when the temperature got hot or cool and rained. But it allowed us to create a very smooth surface on the outside of the building. I was inspired by a piece of glass that I've got in my collection at home by a designer called Timo Sarpanava, and it's called a lancet piece, and it's an asymmetrical form, and it just gave me the idea that actually old towers don't need to be axial symmetrical. They could be asymmetrical, and particularly one that's trying to pick up the sense of movement. You've got Blackfriars Road and you've got the River Thames, both very, very dynamic influences on the form of that building.
You have just to pause there, you have a glass collection.
I do. Yeah.
This doesn't surprise me. I didn't know, but this doesn't surprise me, given your portfolio of work. So yeah, and it's funny that it makes sense that you say that, because this building, like the Gherkin is affectionately known as the Gherkin, and we have the walkie-talkie and the Shard. This building affectionately known as the Vase, or sometimes the Boomerang.
Yes. Yes, somebody referred to it as a Kardashian the other day as well. Can't remember where that comes from. But,
yes,
but it was promoted as the Lancet vase, and in fact, the manufacturer got involved with St George, who were the delivery partner of Berkeley Homes.
And you've described this building in the past as the most beautiful tall building in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, beauty. So subjective, but for what it's worth, I have a view on what is beautiful, and that building is incredibly beautiful. We could not do it again, and could never have done it at another time other than then, really, when there was an opportunity, because now everything has changed. You can't have as much glass, you can't there's different parameters around design now.
It's very much of its time.
It's very much of its time. I mean, there is an insulated inner skin that's coloured, and it changes from earth tones to sky tones on the upper level. So as you get closer to the building, you start to see these sort of red and these orange panels that sit behind the glass, and it brings it home that it's actually residential and not a commercial building. It's not like the Shard that is just plain art. It has this layering and this depth. So it's this thing about approaching the building and giving legibility to the function and to the program within. But from a distance, it has a fantastic skyline, and it's appeared on lots of films. I mean, I was really excited when I was watching A Mission Impossible, and they jumped off the top of Tate Modern, and there was this sort of, must have been 10-second freeze of Blackfriars there with Tom Cruise in the foreground, and
that must be surreal seeing one of your buildings.
It is, and you still see it now. I mean, it's not locked into the iconography of London like Cheesegrate and the Gherkin is at the moment, but I do think it has a lot of beauty.
Let's move on now to talk about the second scheme that we're going to talk about today, which is the one that you wish you had done.
Yeah, it's. Interestingly enough, it was a competition that I think Allied London and the City Council organised, and it's a competition we bid for. But at that time, we'd completed Beetham Tower, but we hadn't done that much work. We'd done Urbis, and we had a very, very elegant solution, which was effectively.
So this site, just to be clear, this site is the Manchester Civil Justice Centre, right?
Yes,
on the edge of Spinning Fields.
Yes, it's
off Bridge Street.
It's a civil justice centre, and interestingly enough, our proposal was virtually identical to what was built. We didn't win the competition.
Okay.
But Denton Cole Commercial won the competition and came up with a very elegant proposition of two planes, responding to the south and the north, with a series of boxes that slide in and out that replicate or represent the courts that were articulated within the building, and obviously introduced colour and so forth. I mean, it's a very distinctive building.
Yeah,
and
it's like cantilevered.
Yeah, cantilevered arms,
out, yeah.
which again is something we always the dynamic and sense of movement we always try and introduce within our work. So I think the Civil Justice Centre is a really good modern addition to the city that we haven't been involved with, and.
But you would have liked to have been, yes. So you bid. I remember reading there was quite a lot of bidders.
There were a lot of bidders.
Significant amount of bidders for the architectural competition. Denton Marshall won it, as you said. It was shortlisted for the Sterling Prize.
Yeah.
I'm described in The Guardian as, of course, this is a court complex, including the family court. The perfect place to get divorced was the headline of the article about the building. But you said your design was quite similar to what was ultimately delivered.
There was a really strong strategy. That's why I have an empathy for the building, I guess, because it's an approach that we would have taken given the opportunity. But I think they've done a spectacular job, Denton Marshall.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of, so other people on this podcast have interpreted this this question in a different way. So the one you wish you'd done is very much a scheme that you were in the running for, but someone else ended up winning. I wanted to ask you about a scheme in Liverpool. Which would have been Liverpool's tallest building, I think 60 stories, that often is spoken about because there's people in Liverpool who want to see tall buildings. Could that be considered as one that got away?
There's so many that get away. I mean, we've obviously been fortunate in the number of buildings we've been working on, but in competitions, I mean, the Germans used to think if you were successful in 1 in 17, that was a really good hit rate.
Wow.
I guess ours is probably more like 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 or something like that. But there was a really beautiful scheme on the docks for a company called Marrow that we designed and took to committee, and it lost by 1 vote, I think, in Liverpool.
Right.
So it just fell away, but it was a very sort of a tall building, but it had 2 crystalline pieces sort of leaning up to it. And it would have been a skyline icon for Liverpool without a doubt. Yeah. But that one got away. I try not to think of those that get away because it's like we do our very best. If we don't get there, we move on.
Yeah. And
we're constantly disappointed and upset, but then we have to move on. And there's lots of schemes, international schemes that we've worked on in Sydney, in Malaysia, in Dubai, that we've bid for that haven't gone ahead. Mm-hmm. So you're just grateful for the ones that you can move forward with. But I think we're very fortunate. Some people may say unfortunate for the city that we've been able to work within the city and build a lot of what we think are really spectacular additions to Manchester.
So let's move on and talk about the dream scheme then. So you sent me this beforehand so I could do a bit of research, but in all honesty, this one is completely sort of seems like it's something from your mind. So explain to us what Halo is, Ian.
It's quite interesting because it's actually not a building, but it's a vision I have that Manchester has never had a large park because, as I said earlier, it wasn't a city of parks like London or some of the European cities. The parks were located on the outskirts, Phillips Park, Alexandra Park, and so on. And they're big parks and related to middle-class residential communities. So Manchester has never had a park in the centre, and it could never have a park now. It's too dense.
Mayfield Park, but again, it's not.
Mayfield is probably a really good addition to the city. Relatively small. I think it's only 6.5 acres compared with Alexander Park, which is 60 acres.
Yeah.
So we're not able to create the traditional Victorian park in Manchester anymore. What we do have is about 120 pocket parks around the city, squares, public spaces. We all know them, we cross through them, they connect buildings. But my vision is to try and create something completely unique in Manchester. And with the changes that we're starting to see around traffic and circulation, we have an inner ring road around Manchester, which really defines the boundary. And in between there, it's 30 minutes walk north-south, 40 minutes walk east-west to the ring road. Or to the known boundaries of the ring road. I'm including Ancoats and so forth as being city centre, even though they're on the other side of the ring road. But it sort of goes around the Mancunian Way, and then it goes through Salford, and then it goes past Manchester Arena and Great Ancoat Street and so forth. If you actually think of that, I'm not looking at replacing traffic, because we've got terrible problems with traffic at the moment, particularly to the south of the city in Deansgate. But the idea of elevating a park over the ring road. So the ring road is about 40 metres wide, and it's 5 miles long. If you were to start at one point and go round it, it would be 5 miles. So if you imagine maybe 20 metres high, a deck that's full of landscaping, there's coffee shops, there's a bit of retail. It's almost like a grandiose version of what's being done in Castlefield at the moment, but something of
on the viaduct.
On the viaduct, but something of an enormous scale that's circular, that wraps around the city. So you can start on a walk, and you can have a 5-mile walk, or you can drop down, and it connects with Mayfield. It can connect with Castlefield. It passes through all those areas. So you can make those physical connections around the city, but it's a safe space for running, walking, well-being, landscaping, cycling, whatever we want to do away from the street, but connected to the street. Now, it's a space that is there. It's airspace, because nobody's built over the top of the Mancunian Way. So I'd like to see this sort of halo running round, this arc of light, effectively
tracing the route of the inner ring
road, but as an elevated level with landscaping on it. And we could just start in one part. We would need some levelling up funding, please, to do that. But there's lots of space where you could take structure down, and you could sort out all the technical things like that. But it needs a vision. There's nothing like it in the world. I mean, if you look at the High Line in New York, that's probably the closest thing. And when everyone thinks of New York now, it's not skyscrapers as well, it's the High Line, which was on top of an old rail viaduct. Now, we've got the little thing in Castlefield, but something that captures the city and links all these spaces together. And that would be a park on the top of that, which would be 80 acres, which is... Alexander Park is 60 acres, so it's larger than Alexander Park. It would be the new Victorian Park in Manchester, and it's the only way we could achieve something of that scale and continuity that links all those disparate areas of Manchester. It's an idea, but
it's a fantastic one. Yeah.
I think I'll draw it. I'll get some work done and some visuals, because we should be able to do something like that. And if the government wants to provide some funding towards it, then we need some projects that actually benefit the residents of the city and the visitors to the city, and set Manchester out as a unique place. And I think, to create something that is unique in the world, we have an opportunity to do that in Manchester. Very few other cities do.
Yeah, well, Manchester always says, doesn't it, it's a city that likes to do things differently. So if any engineers, landscape architects listening, get in touch with Ian and let's get the halo off the ground. Ian, thank you so much for scheming with me today and for talking to us about those 3 projects. That was the last scheming podcast of this series. If you've enjoyed it, please do let us know. A 5-star review wherever you get your podcast will help other people find it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you again very soon.
This episode of Scheming was sponsored by DeSimone. DeSimone Consulting Engineering provides structural engineering, facade design consulting, integrated design and detailing, and construction consulting services for buildings of all types. Known for delivering thoughtful, innovative and sustainable solutions, DeSimone provides dedicated services from its UK, US, Canada, South America and Middle East offices. To find out more, visit www.d-simone.com.